Hello and welcome to this video on the animation principle of timing. In this video we'll be looking how the principle of timing can change how the object that we are animating conveys different properties. So we'll be looking at changing the timing to make something be as light as a feather or as heavy as a bowling ball, just by changing the timing of the animation. So first of all, we're going to make a brand new composition. I'm going to rename this to simply say feather, and make sure you change the frame rate to 12 frames per second from the list. Everything else we can leave as default. Now for me, by default, because I'm on the default view, I've only got the composition panel and the timeline panel. So first of all, I just need to swap over to the libraries section. This is going to give me the libraries panel. So from here, I can see my composition. This is the one that we've just made. And in a empty space, I'm just going to right click and go to import and file. There's a file that I've saved to your Teams page, and it's just featherimage.png. So now it's added it to my library. So I can simply click and drag in this image onto my composition. Just going to go back to default. Now I'm just going to resize this, okay, just to get a more pleasing image. So I'm just going to resize it. I'm going to use the rotate tool to just rotate it as well. And then I'm just going to move it to start off the screen. So this animation is going to get this feather to fall and land at the bottom of our screen. And you'll see how the different timing we apply is going to change the properties of this feather, okay, to either be really heavy or to be very, very light. And that's all going to use the idea, the principle of timing. So first thing I'm going to do in the timeline, I'm just going to change the scale of my timeline just so I can see the individual frames. Okay, so I've got frames 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. On the left, we can see my feather image. Okay, and we're just going to be animating on using the position and the rotation. So with the feather image selected, I can press P on my keyboard to bring up the position keyframes. I can hold Shift and press R, and that's going to bring up the rotation so that I have both. Okay, first thing that we're going to do is for both of these selected, I'm just going to make a brand new keyframe. Okay, just so we have a keyframe at frame 0 where it's the starting position of it being off screen. Now from there, first thing that we're going to do is I'm just going to communicate how to make something be really heavy. Okay, and using the idea of timings, the basic idea is that if we make something timing wise, if we make something further away, so for example for this one I'm just going to go down to 1 second. And under the position, I'm just going to drag down the feather on the Y. So remember, we have X on the left, Y on the right. So if I drag down the Y, it's going to make it hit the bottom of the screen. And we've done it over a course of 12 frames, so 1 second. Okay. So if we play that, it's going to move down at a relatively slow pace. Okay. Now, watch what happens if I drag this to the left, so this last keyframe, if I drag this and move it down to say 3 frames. So there's a shorter distance between the frames now, and it's going to come down very, very quickly, okay? So for instance, let me just make this even shorter. Now it really flies down, and this could really communicate something being as heavy as a bowling ball, okay? And it's going to fly down at such a really fast speed, and the quicker the object moves, it can communicate how heavy it is. Okay, so again, if I really drag this down to more of it being 1 second and 7 frames, again, it's a longer period of time, and you could almost imagine this sort of floating down, okay, because it's as light as a feather, and that's just with the distance of those 2 frames. So we're going to try making 2 examples to communicate those 2 ideas of different timings. Okay, so the first one, let's make this feather be really heavy. Okay, so it's a feather, but maybe it's made out of lead. Okay, so it's a lead feather. It's going to really fall down very, very quickly. So My first keyframe is going to be on frame 2. Okay, so that's really going to fly down and hit the ground. Now, it's going to be traveling at such force that when it hits the ground, it's going to show a little bit of movement, and we're just going to have it kind of bounce in place for a couple of frames. So I'm very simply just going to move over to frame 3, and on the y-axis on position, just move it up a little bit. Okay, that's going to create a sort of bounce in motion. Therefore, frame 4, I'm going to bring it back down to the bottom. Actually, let's move that onto frame 5 to give it a bit of a, so it hangs in the air for a frame first, okay? Okay, so frame 5, then frame 6 and 7, going to do another little bounce, but this one's going to be a little bit shorter, so it's going to be a bit of a smaller bounce. And again, move it down to the bottom. So now we've got frames. A keyframe is placed on frame 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, and if I play it, it's going to create a nice little bounce. So again, I'm just going to set the play area. So if I move down to my first frame, so frame 0, and press B on my keyboard, then I can move over to my last frame and just press N on my keyboard. And that's going to set the playback range. So now it's just going to loop around these frames. So press spacebar, and now we can just see a loop of that animation. And as you can see now, when it falls, actually I'm just going to move this a few frames over. Now you can see it really communicates weight. It really flies down, okay, as if it is made out of lead, and it has a nice little bounce at the end. So this is communicating our timing. The way that it's sort of been timed communicates a really heavy and fast weight. So we're just going to save this sort of one out. So I'm just going to rename this one. So I'm going to right click on the feather and go to rename, and we're just going to call this feather underscore heavy. Okay, so you'll be able to render this out and put it into your slides for your skills button section. Okay, now that we've done heavy, we're going to do the reverse. We're going to do a feather that's really light. So I'm just going to, with the feather heavy selected, press Control and D to make a duplicate. And I'm just going to rename this one. So again, right click, rename, and this one's going to be feather light. So just so we kind of don't see the heavy one, I'm just going to use the eye, the looker, to untick that, and it's going to hide that one. And the one next to it is the lock. Okay, this is going to just lock that layer so I can't accidentally select it as I'm working on the other one. So now we're just going to focus on the feather light. So let's expand the layer. And again, I'm just going to press P on my keyboard for the full position, hold Shift and press R for the rotation as well. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of all these other keyframes that we made. And this bottom keyframe, I'm just going to drag this one over to, let's go 2 seconds. So 1 second, 2 seconds, there we go. So now the feather's going to fall really nice and slow. Okay, just need to expand my play area. So that feather is going to go really, really slow. Okay, so this one's going to be light as a feather. So now this one just looks a bit boring. So like what we did with the ball when it bounced, I'm going to add a little bit of detail now just to kind of communicate more about the properties of this particular item. So we're going to make it so it just flops down like an actual feather would. So from the starting frame, I'm just going to move down to, let's do frame 2. Let's just zoom in a little bit more on the scale. Okay, so at frame 2, I'm going to manually sort of change it now. I'm just going to sort of click and drag the feather into a sort of position that I want. So let's start here. And I'm just going to rotate it a little bit now to kind of communicate that motion of it flip-flopping from left to right. So I've done a keyframe now on position and rotation. Okay, at frame 2. Let's go to frame 5. Actually, this one's going to be a bit quick. Let's move this to frame 5, actually, to give ourselves a nice soft motion. Okay, so let's do 5. Let's do frame 10. And we're going to go to the opposite side. So again, I'm going to click and drag the feather to the opposite side. And let's just change that rotation now. Okay, so it's making a nice crissing motion. Okay, so crisscross down the screen. Okay, and then from here, just going to go to let's go to 1 second and 3 frames. Should be enough. And again, I'm just going to move this over to the opposite side of the screen again. Again, change the rotation. So again, it's just flopping down. And then lastly, just for the ends, let's move over. It's just going to very slowly get to the end. Cool. So again, let's just set my play range. So B at the start, move over to the very last frame, go a few over, and N. And now I can just click play and just rotate it. Cool. And now we can see it's really it's nice and slow. It's maybe a little bit quick actually. So if we want to make it slower, let's just move over these frames. Okay, let's really exaggerate this frame. So let's make a bit more space. Again, the idea of principle of timing is the more space we have in between each frame, the slower it's going to play back. So I think as the feather is falling, I want to create more distance, more space between each of the frames. Okay, so it's getting slower as it kind of falls down. So let's kind of see how that looks. Cool. And there we are, we have it falling light as a feather. Okay, it's really come down to a stop. And again, if I just look at the heavy one, this one's really, really heavy. Okay, so there's 2 different animations. Okay, with the same action, we have a feather falling, but hopefully now you can see the differences of the timing, how close they are together here, how far apart they are here. The idea of timing is going to communicate and change if it falls really, really heavy or if it falls very, very light and softly. So that's the idea of this animation principle, the idea of timing. I want you to give these 2 a try, render them out and put them into your slides.